Man meets Jesus in heaven, learns Earth's secrets, incredible NDE. The quiet hum of the ventilator was the only sound in the hospital room. Michael lay on the bed, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. The beeping monitor beside him reflected his struggle, each sound growing more faint. At 48, he hadn't expected to be here. Clinging to life after a sudden heart attack had pulled him from the mundane safety of his daily routine. His wife, Claire, sat by his side, her hands trembling as she held his. Tears streamed silently down her face, and her whispered prayers filled the space between them. "Please," she murmured, "don't take him from me." Michael could feel her desperation even as his own consciousness wavered. There was a strange detachment now, a feeling of weightlessness that made the ache in his chest seem distant and irrelevant. The room around him began to blur, the edges dissolving into light. For a moment, panic seized him. Was this it? Was he really dying? Then, as if a veil had been lifted, the pain vanished, replaced by an overwhelming sense of peace. He opened his eyes to find himself standing, not in the sterile hospital room, but in a vast, radiant expanse. The air shimmered with colors he couldn't name, and the light seemed to emanate from everywhere, wrapping him in warmth. "Where am I?" Michael whispered, his voice trembling with awe. "You have crossed the threshold," a voice replied, clear and resonant. Michael turned to see a figure approaching, clothed in radiant white. The man's presence was unlike anything Michael had ever experienced, an indescribable combination of power, peace, and familiarity. Though the man said nothing more, Michael knew instinctively who he was. "Jesus?" Michael breathed, his knees weakening. The man nodded, his eyes filled with compassion. "Welcome, Michael. You are here to understand." Michael's heart raced, not from fear, but from the sheer magnitude of the moment. "Understand what?" he asked. "Why am I here? Am I dead?" "You have left the earthly realm," Jesus said, his voice steady. "But your journey is not over. There are truths you must see, truths about your life, your world, and the path ahead." Before Michael could respond, the shimmering expanse around him began to shift. The light coalesced into images, forming scenes that seemed to float in the air like living memories. He saw himself as a child, playing in the backyard of his childhood home. He saw his wedding day, the moment he first held his son, and countless other milestones that had shaped his life. "What is this?" Michael asked, his voice trembling. "Why are you showing me this?" "These are the moments that define your journey," Jesus said. "But there is more to see. Look closely." The images shifted, focusing now on moments Michael had long forgotten, or perhaps tried to forget. He saw himself losing his temper with his son, ignoring Claire when she needed him most, turning away from opportunities to help those in need. Each scene hit him like a blow, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. "I didn't mean to," Michael began, his voice breaking. "I thought I was doing my best." Jesus placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, the touch both grounding and comforting. "Your life has been a series of choices," he said. "Some aligned with love, others with fear or indifference. But understanding comes not from judgment, but from seeing." Michael nodded, his throat tight. He turned back to the images, determined to face whatever came next. The scenes shifted again, and Michael found himself standing on a mountaintop, overlooking a vast, intricate network of rivers, valleys, and cities. The landscape seemed both familiar and otherworldly, as though it reflected Earth but was not entirely of it. Below him, he could see people moving through their lives, working, laughing, arguing, and praying. "This is your world as it is," Jesus said, gesturing toward the expanse. "Each person, each moment, is interconnected, part of a greater design." Michael watched in awe as golden threads of light appeared, connecting the people below. Some threads were strong and bright, while others were faint, frayed, or broken. The threads pulsed rhythmically, as if alive. "What are those?" Michael asked. "They are the connections between souls," Jesus replied. "Acts of love, kindness, and understanding strengthen them. Acts of fear, anger, and indifference weaken them. These threads are the fabric of humanity, the essence of what binds you together." Michael's chest tightened as he noticed threads snapping, their light extinguished. "Why are some breaking?" he asked, his voice heavy with concern. "Because the choices made on earth are not isolated," Jesus said. "They ripple outward, affecting not just the individual but the collective. Every act, no matter how small, either strengthens or weakens the whole." The words struck Michael deeply. He thought of the times he had chosen convenience over connection, comfort over compassion. How many threads had he weakened without realizing it? The scene shifted once more, and Michael was now standing in the middle of a bustling city. The golden threads were still visible, but so were dark, shadowy tendrils weaving through the streets and buildings. These tendrils moved like smoke, creeping into the lives of the people they touched. "What is this darkness?" Michael asked, his voice trembling. "It is fear," Jesus said. "It is greed, hatred, and indifference. It feeds on separation, on the breaking of the threads. It thrives where love is absent." Michael watched as the tendrils wrapped around a young man sitting alone on a park bench, his shoulders slumped in despair. No one stopped to check on him, their golden threads dimming as they passed by. The tendrils grew stronger, tightening their grip on the man until he was almost completely enveloped. "Can't they see him?" Michael asked, his heart breaking. "Why doesn't anyone help?" "They see," Jesus said softly. "But many choose to look away. The darkness blinds not through sight, but through the heart." Michael clenched his fists, a deep resolve building within him. "What can I do?" he asked. "How do I fight this darkness?" Jesus turned to him, his eyes filled with both gravity and hope. "You will see," he said. "But first, you must understand the truth of your world, the secrets that lie beneath what you think you know." The shimmering expanse shifted again, and Michael felt a surge of anticipation. He didn't know what awaited him, but he was ready to face it. The shimmering landscape around Michael began to change, dissolving into a vast, luminous expanse that felt both infinite and deeply intimate. The golden threads connecting humanity grew more distinct, their vibrant pulses forming a delicate web that stretched as far as the eye could see. The sight was breathtaking, but it carried a weight, an undeniable awareness of responsibility and connection. "Where are we now?" Michael asked, his voice tinged with wonder and trepidation. "This is the layer beneath what you see on earth," Jesus replied, his voice calm and steady. "It is the foundation of your world's true essence. Here, the actions of humanity are not obscured by distractions. They are laid bare." As Michael watched, the golden threads shifted, their brightness fluctuating. Some glowed with warmth and vitality, while others dimmed, frayed, or snapped entirely. The tendrils of darkness he had seen earlier were here too, weaving insidiously between the threads. "What causes this darkness?" Michael asked, his gaze fixed on a thread that flickered and then vanished. "It is born of choices," Jesus said. "Fear, greed, apathy, these are the forces that feed it. The threads of connection are fragile, and when they weaken, the darkness fills the void." Michael's stomach turned as he noticed entire sections of the web dimming. Cities, communities, and even individual lives fell into shadow, their connections severed. He could see the people affected, those consumed by loneliness, anger, or despair, their hearts closed to the light. "Is this irreversible?" Michael asked hesitantly. Jesus turned to him, his gaze penetrating. "Nothing is beyond redemption. Every thread can be restored, every heart can be reignited, but it requires understanding, intention, and the courage to choose love over fear." The scene shifted again, and Michael found himself standing in a quiet forest. The golden threads were still visible, but now they intertwined with the trees, the rivers, and even the air itself. The entire ecosystem pulsed with life, connected to the same web he had seen among humanity. "Even the earth is part of this?" Michael asked, astonished. "Everything is connected," Jesus said. "The earth was created as a living, breathing extension of this design. Humanity's choices affect not only each other but the very planet you inhabit." Michael knelt, placing a hand on the ground. He could feel the subtle hum of life beneath his palm, the rhythm of existence resonating through him. But as he focused, he felt discord. a dissonance that seemed to disrupt the harmony. "What's causing this?" he asked, looking up. "Exploitation," Jesus said, his tone heavy. "The earth's resources were meant to sustain and nurture, but greed and ignorance have disrupted the balance. Just as fear weakens the threads between people, greed weakens the threads connecting humanity to the earth." Michael watched as sections of the forest faded into shadow. Trees withered, rivers dried, and the hum of life grew faint. He saw figures moving through the destruction, men and women focused solely on profit, oblivious to the damage they caused. Their golden threads dimmed as the darkness around them grew stronger. "Can this be healed?" Michael asked, his voice trembling. "It can't," Jesus said. "But healing requires awareness and action. Humanity must remember its connection to the earth, to each other, and to the Creator. Without that, the balance will continue to deteriorate." The forest dissolved, and Michael was now standing in a vast, bustling city. The golden threads were visible here too, weaving through the buildings, streets, and people. But in this environment, they were overshadowed by the glow of artificial light, neon signs, screens, and endless advertisements. Michael noticed how the threads seemed dimmer here, as though the city's noise and chaos muted their vitality. People moved quickly, their eyes fixed on devices, their faces strained. The threads connecting them were thin, frayed, and often severed. "This is disconnection," Jesus said, gesturing to the scene. "In the pursuit of progress and convenience, humanity has often lost sight of what truly matters. The more you focus on the self, the more the threads weaken." Michael's chest tightened as he observed the people. A young woman sat alone at a cafe, her face illuminated by her phone. A man rushed past her, his gaze fixed on his smartwatch. Nearby, a group of children played in silence, each absorbed in their own screen. "Do they even see each other?" Michael asked, his voice filled with sadness. "Not as they should," Jesus replied. "Distraction is one of the greatest tools of the darkness. It blinds you to the connections that sustain your soul." As Michael watched, he noticed a faint glow near the edge of the crowd. A man had stopped to help an elderly woman pick up her fallen groceries. Their threads brightened, pulsing with a warmth that seemed to push back the surrounding shadow. "There is always hope," Jesus said. "Even in the darkest places, love can flourish. But it requires intention." The city began to fade, replaced by a small, humble home. Inside, a family sat around a dinner table, their hands joined in prayer. The golden threads connecting them were strong and vibrant, their light filling the room with warmth. "This," Jesus said, "is the power of connection. It is not grand gestures or monumental achievements that sustain the web of humanity. It is moments like these, acts of love, gratitude, and presence." Michael felt a lump rise in his throat. He thought of his own family, of the times he had taken them for granted. He had always assumed that love was understood, that it didn't need to be expressed constantly. But now he saw how every act, no matter how small, strengthened or weakened the threads. The scene dissolved, and Michael was back in the shimmering expanse. The golden threads stretched around him, glowing brighter now as if responding to his growing awareness. "You have seen the truth of your world," Jesus said. "The threads that connect all things, the choices that strengthen or weaken them, and the forces that seek to divide. What will you do with this understanding?" Michael hesitated, his mind racing. "I want to strengthen the threads," he said finally. "I want to choose love, to push back the darkness. But how can I do that if I'm no longer on earth?" Jesus placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, his gaze filled with both gravity and hope. "Your journey is not over. There is more to see and more to do. But first, you must face the deepest truths of your world, and of yourself." The air shimmered again, and Michael felt a surge of anticipation. He didn't know what awaited him next, but he was ready to face it. The shimmering expanse shifted once more, and Michael found himself standing in a place that felt vast yet confined, luminous yet shadowed. The golden threads of connection were still visible, but they were interwoven with tendrils of darkness that pulsed ominously. This was not a place of peace, it was a battlefield, though no soldiers or weapons were in sight. "Where are we?" Michael asked, his voice tinged with unease. "This is the realm where unseen forces operate," Jesus replied, his voice steady. "It is here that the struggles of humanity are shaped, not by physical battles, but by the battle for hearts and minds." Michael turned, his eyes scanning the strange space. The threads and tendrils seemed to be in constant motion, pushing and pulling against each other. He noticed areas where the golden light was strong, holding the darkness at bay, and others where the shadow seemed to overwhelm. "What are these forces?" Michael asked, his gaze fixed on a particularly violent clash between light and shadow. "The forces of love and fear," Jesus said. "They are present in every choice, every action. Love binds, heals, and strengthens the threads. Fear divides, corrupts, and weakens them." As he watched, Michael saw figures begin to appear within the battlefield. These weren't soldiers, but ordinary people. He saw a young woman kneeling in prayer, her golden thread glowing brighter as she wept. Across from her, a man stood alone, his shadowed tendrils thickening as he clenched his fists, his face twisted in anger. "Are they part of this battle?" Michael asked. "They are the battle," Jesus said. "Every choice they make, every thought they entertain, feeds either the light or the darkness. Humanity is not a passive participant in this struggle, it is the very heart of it." The scene shifted, and Michael found himself in a bustling corporate office. The golden threads were faint here, almost invisible, while the tendrils of darkness were stronger, weaving between the desks and binding the workers in their grip. The people moved with robotic efficiency, their eyes dull and their faces devoid of expression. "What's happening here?" Michael asked, his chest tightening. "This is the consequence of a life consumed by fear and greed," Jesus said. "The people here have traded their freedom for security, their connection for isolation. The darkness thrives in such an environment, feeding on their disconnection." Michael's heart ached as he watched the workers. He noticed a man sitting at his desk, his shoulders slumped. A faint golden thread connected him to a family photo on his desk, but it was frayed, barely holding on. The man glanced at the photo, his expression softening for a moment, before the tendrils of darkness pulled his focus back to his screen. "He's trying," Michael said, his voice filled with sorrow. "But he's trapped. Trapped only by the belief that he has no choice," Jesus said. "The golden thread remains. It cannot be severed unless he lets it go." The office dissolved, replaced by a quiet suburban street. Here, the golden threads were stronger, weaving between homes and families. But even in this seemingly idyllic setting, Michael saw shadows creeping in. A couple argued in their driveway, their threads dimming with each sharp word. A child sat alone on a swing, his thread flickering as he stared at the ground. "This is the subtlety of darkness," Jesus said. "It does not always arrive with force. Often, it seeps in through neglect, through small acts of indifference or unkindness." Michael's chest tightened as he watched the child on the swing. A faint golden thread connected him to a nearby house, where his mother stood at the window, her phone in hand. The thread pulsed weakly, as if begging for attention. "Can't she see him?" Michael asked. "She sees," Jesus said, "but distraction blinds as surely as darkness." The scene shifted again, and Michael was now standing in a grand cathedral. The golden threads here were vibrant, weaving through the congregation as they knelt in prayer. But even here, shadows lingered at the edges, coiling around those whose minds wandered, whose hearts carried resentment or fear. Michael noticed a man sitting in the back pew, his thread faint and frayed. He stared at the floor, his hands clenched tightly. Nearby, an older woman glanced at him, her thread reaching toward his, but she hesitated, pulling back. "Why doesn't she help him?" Michael asked. "Fear," Jesus said simply. "Fear of rejection, fear of inadequacy. Even within places of light, fear can find a foothold." Michael's heart ached as he watched the man sink deeper into himself. He wanted to shout, to urge the woman to reach out, to remind her that even the smallest act of kindness could make a difference. But he knew he was only an observer here. The cathedral dissolved, and Michael found himself back in the shimmering expanse. The golden threads stretched endlessly around him, interwoven with the tendrils of darkness. The push and pull between them was relentless, a constant struggle that defined the fabric of existence. You see now the forces at work, Jesus said. They are not external. They are within you, within every person. Each thought, each choice, feeds one or the other. Michael turned to Jesus, his voice filled with urgency. How do we fight the darkness? How do we strengthen the light? By choosing love, Jesus said. Not in grand gestures, but in the small, everyday moments. By seeing those around you, by reaching out, by refusing to let fear dictate your actions. Michael nodded, the weight of his understanding settling over him. He thought of the people he had seen, the man in the office, the child on the swing, the man in the cathedral. Each had the potential for light, for connection, but it required someone to act, to care, to see them. What happens if we don't? Michael asked. If the darkness wins? Jesus' gaze was steady. The darkness can never fully win, for the light is eternal. But the threads of connection are fragile. When they break, the pain ripples outward, weakening the whole. Your world is at a tipping point, Michael. The choices made now will determine the balance. The expanse around them began to shift again, the golden threads glowing brighter as the tendrils of darkness receded. Michael felt a surge of hope, a renewed sense of purpose. What happens next? He asked, his voice filled with determination. There is more to see, Jesus said, more to understand. But you are beginning to grasp the truth. The battle is not fought with weapons, but with choices. Each act of love strengthens the threads. Each moment of fear weakens them. Michael took a deep breath, his resolve hardening. He was ready to face whatever came next. The shimmering expanse shifted again, and Michael found himself standing on the edge of what felt like an endless void. Yet it was not empty. Within the void, faint patterns began to emerge, intricate and ever-changing. They stretched in every direction, forming a mesmerizing latticework of light and energy that pulsed with life. It was as if he were seeing the very essence of existence, the blueprint upon which all things were built. What is this place? Michael asked, his voice filled with awe. This is the foundation, Jesus replied. It is where all things are connected, where creation and intention meet. It is the design that sustains life and binds the universe together. Michael stepped forward tentatively, feeling the hum of energy beneath his feet. The patterns responded to his presence, glowing brighter and shifting subtly. He realized with a start that his own actions were influencing the lattice. Why is it changing? He asked, watching the patterns ripple. Because you are part of it, Jesus said. Every thought, every choice, every action sends ripples through the design. Humanity is not separate from creation. You are integral to it. As Michael walked further, the patterns began to form recognizable images. He saw glimpses of earth, mountains, rivers, cities, all woven seamlessly into the lattice. Each image was connected by threads of light, just like the ones he had seen before. These threads, Michael said, gesturing to them, they're everywhere. They're not just between people, are they? No, Jesus said. The threads bind all of creation. They are the manifestation of love, the force that sustains and unites. Where love flourishes, the threads grow stronger. Where fear and division take root, they weaken. Michael reached out, touching one of the threads. A surge of warmth coursed through him, and he saw a memory flash before his eyes. A time when he had comforted a stranger on a subway, offering a simple word of kindness that had brought tears to their eyes. The thread pulsed brightly, as if acknowledging the moment. That was so small, Michael said, his voice soft. I didn't think it mattered. Every act of love matters, Jesus said. No act is too small. Each one strengthens the web, bringing light to places where darkness seeks to creep in. The images within the lattice began to shift, revealing darker scenes. Michael saw forests being destroyed, rivers polluted, and animals fleeing from barren lands. The threads connecting these parts of creation were frayed and dim, their light fading with every destructive act. This is what happens when humanity forgets its connection to the earth, Jesus said. The planet was entrusted to you as a gift, a reflection of the Creator's love. But greed and neglect have weakened its threads. Michael felt a pang of guilt as he thought of his own indifference. He had often ignored environmental concerns, dismissing them as someone else's responsibility. Now, standing here, he could see the consequences of that mindset. "Can it be fixed?" he asked, his voice heavy. "It can," Jesus said, "but it requires a shift in perspective. Humanity must remember that it is not above creation but part of it. The earth's threads can be healed, but only through intentional acts of stewardship and respect." The lattice shifted again, this time showing the connections between people. Michael saw moments of love and kindness, a mother comforting her child, a group of volunteers rebuilding a storm-damaged home, a man sharing his last piece of bread with a stranger. The threads in these scenes were vibrant and strong, their light spreading outward. But he also saw moments of pain, a man yelling at his wife, a teenager bullied by peers, a group of people turning their backs on someone in need. The threads in these scenes were frayed and dim, some snapping entirely. "Why do we hurt each other like this?" Michael asked, his voice filled with sorrow. "Fear," Jesus said simply. "Fear of rejection, fear of vulnerability, fear of losing control. Fear blinds humanity to its connections, leading to actions that weaken the threads." Michael turned to Jesus, his expression resolute. "How do we stop it? How do we fight that fear?" "By choosing love," Jesus said. "It is not always easy. Fear is loud and persistent, but love is stronger. It requires courage, humility, and the willingness to see beyond yourself." The lattice began to glow brighter, and Michael saw a single golden thread stretching toward him. He reached out and touched it, feeling a surge of energy as another memory surfaced. This time, it was a moment when he had failed, a time when he had walked past a homeless man begging for help, too preoccupied with his own concerns to stop. The thread dimmed at his touch, and Michael felt a wave of shame. "I didn't help him," he said, his voice trembling. "I thought I was too busy." "That moment weakened the thread," Jesus said, "but it is not lost. Every choice moving forward offers a chance to strengthen it again." The words filled Michael with both guilt and hope. He realized that his past mistakes didn't define him, but they carried lessons he needed to learn. The threads were not static, they could be mended, but only through intentional action. As they continued walking, Michael noticed a new pattern emerging within the lattice. It wasn't just light and energy, it was words, written in a language he couldn't understand but felt he could somehow comprehend. The words pulsed with meaning, resonating in his soul. "What is this?" he asked. "It is the truth," Jesus said. "The design of creation is written in love." These words are the foundation, the essence of what binds all things together. Michael stared at the glowing words, his heart swelling with a sense of purpose. He didn't need to understand the language to feel its power. It was a reminder that, at its core, existence was not about power or control, but about connection and love. The lattice began to fade, and Michael found himself back in the shimmering expanse. The patterns were gone, but their presence lingered in his heart. "You have seen the blueprint of creation," Jesus said. "You now understand the forces that shape your world, the threads of love and the shadows of fear. The question is, what will you do with this understanding?" Michael took a deep breath, his mind racing with the possibilities. "I want to strengthen the threads," he said. "I want to choose love, to push back the darkness." Jesus' gaze was steady, filled with both gravity and hope. "Your journey is not yet complete. There is still more to see, more to learn. But you are beginning to understand the truth." The air shimmered again, and Michael felt a surge of anticipation. He didn't know what awaited him, but he was ready to face it. The shimmering expanse around Michael began to shift once more, and the golden threads of connection receded into the distance. What replaced them was a vast, infinite horizon filled with pathways, countless roads branching out in every direction. Each path glimmered faintly, some bright and inviting, others shadowed and foreboding. The air was alive with potential, charged with the weight of possibility. "What are these paths?" Michael asked, his voice hushed with awe. "These are the choices of humanity," Jesus replied. "Each path represents a decision, an alignment, a moment of intent. The sum of these choices shapes the destiny of the soul and of the world." Michael stepped closer to one of the paths. It glowed softly, its surface etched with memories. As he leaned in, he recognized scenes from his own life. Moments when he had chosen kindness over anger, compassion over indifference. Each decision pulsed like a heartbeat, the light growing brighter with every act of love. "This path feels alive," Michael said, touching it gently. "It is," Jesus said. "Every choice rooted in love strengthens the thread of connection, weaving light into the fabric of creation." Michael turned to another path. This one was darker, its light dimmed by shadows. As he approached, he felt a chill run through him. The memories etched into this path were different. He saw himself walking past a homeless man, ignoring a friend in need, losing his temper with his son. Each scene felt heavier than the last, the weight of his decisions pressing on his chest. "This is where I failed," Michael said, his voice filled with regret. "You stumbled," Jesus said gently. "But failure is not final. Each moment offers a chance to turn back toward the light, to choose again." Michael stared at the shadowed path, a knot forming in his stomach. "How many of my choices weaken the threads? How much damage have I done?" "More than you realize," Jesus said, his tone steady but compassionate. "But the light is not diminished by your failures. It grows stronger with every choice to realign." The pathways began to shift, intertwining like a great tapestry. Michael could see how each path influenced the others, how one person's choices rippled outward to affect countless lives. A single act of kindness illuminated paths far beyond its origin, while an act of neglect sent shadows creeping into places unseen. "Every choice matters," Jesus said, gesturing to the tapestry. "No decision is insignificant. Even the smallest act of love can alter the course of eternity." Michael felt the truth of those words resonate within him. He thought of the times he had dismissed small opportunities to help, believing they didn't make a difference. Now he saw how wrong he had been. The scene shifted again, and Michael found himself in a crowded marketplace. The golden threads of connection were visible here too, weaving between the people. Some threads were vibrant, their light illuminating the space around them. Others were faint, barely holding on. Michael noticed a young woman standing near a fruit vendor. She hesitated, her hand hovering over her wallet, before walking away empty-handed. Her thread dimmed, and Michael saw a shadow begin to coil around her. No one stopped to help, their own threads too faint to notice her struggle. "This is what happens when love is withheld," Jesus said. "The darkness gains strength in the absence of connection." Michael felt a surge of urgency. What could I have done? What could anyone do in that moment? "See her," Jesus said. "Acknowledge her. Offer what you can, not just material aid, but presence, kindness, and hope." Love begins with seeing. The marketplace dissolved, replaced by a small, dimly lit room. Inside, a man knelt in prayer, his golden thread barely flickering. Michael recognized him as someone he had once dismissed, a neighbor who had always seemed aloof and difficult to approach. "Why is his thread so weak?" Michael asked. "Because he feels unseen, unvalued," Jesus said. "Connection is a two-way bond. To strengthen his thread, someone must reach out." Michael's chest tightened. He thought of the times he had avoided his neighbor, dismissing him as unfriendly without ever trying to connect. Now, seeing the man's quiet desperation, he realized how much those small interactions could have mattered. The dimly lit room faded, and Michael was back in the infinite expanse of pathways. The roads before him pulsed with potential, each one waiting for a choice to be made. Jesus stepped forward, his presence radiating both gravity and warmth. "You see now the power of choice," Jesus said. "Every moment is an opportunity to align your heart with love or with fear. The paths are many, but the destination is shaped by your intent." Michael nodded, his resolve growing stronger. "I want to choose love," he said. "I want to strengthen the threads, to push back the darkness. Then walk the path," Jesus said. "Not with perfection, but with intention." Love is not the absence of failure. It is the courage to rise and choose again. As Michael stepped onto one of the brighter paths, he felt the golden threads around him strengthen. The light grew warmer, spreading outward to touch the other paths. He realized that his choice didn't just affect him. It influenced everyone connected to him, weaving light into the tapestry of creation. "What happens next?" Michael asked, turning to Jesus. "There is more to see," Jesus said. "More to understand. But you are beginning to grasp the truth. The choices you make shape not only your destiny, but the destiny of the world." Michael took a deep breath, his heart steady. He was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The shimmering pathways dissolved, and Michael found himself standing in a vast hall of light. The space was unlike anything he had seen before, an endless expanse where golden threads and dark tendrils swirled together in intricate patterns. It was as though every choice ever made, every action ever taken, was recorded here in perfect detail. "What is this place?" Michael asked, his voice trembling with awe. "This is the archive of intent," Jesus replied. "It holds the record of humanity's collective journey, the moments of love that strengthen creation and the shadows born of fear and neglect." Michael stepped forward, his gaze drawn to the walls of light that pulsed with energy. As he approached, the threads began to shift, revealing scenes from countless lives. Each image flickered briefly before fading into the background, replaced by another. It was a living chronicle, a testimony to the power of human choice. "Why am I here?" Michael asked, turning to Jesus. "To understand the weight of your decisions," Jesus said. "You are not merely an observer of this archive, you are a part of it. Your choices are woven into the fabric of this design." The threads pulsed, and a new scene emerged. Michael saw himself as a young man, standing in a park. A stranger sat on a bench nearby, their shoulders slumped in quiet despair. Michael remembered this moment vividly. He had felt the urge to speak to the stranger, to offer a word of kindness. But he had hesitated, unsure of what to say, and eventually walked away. The image froze, and Michael felt a wave of regret wash over him. "I should have said something," he murmured. "I should have reached out." "The thread was weakened," Jesus said. "But the opportunity was not lost. The choices you make moving forward can mend what was broken." The scene shifted, showing another moment from Michael's life. He was standing in a crowded subway car, watching as a woman struggled to hold onto her bag while comforting a crying child. He had offered her his seat without hesitation, and the gratitude in her eyes had warmed his heart. The thread connected to this memory glowed brightly, its light spreading outward to touch the threads of others on the subway. Michael realized that his small act of kindness had inspired others. A man helping a stranger with their groceries, a young woman offering her umbrella to someone caught in the rain. "Every act of love ripples outward," Jesus said. "Even the smallest gestures can create waves of light." The threads shifted again, revealing darker moments. Michael saw himself in an argument with Claire, his wife. He remembered the harsh words he had spoken, the anger that had clouded his judgment. The thread connected to this memory was frayed and dim, its light struggling against the encroaching darkness. "I hurt her," Michael said, his voice breaking. "I let my pride come before our connection." "And yet," Jesus said, "the thread remains. It is not broken, but it must be repaired." Love is not the absence of conflict. It is the willingness to heal. Michael turned to Jesus, his chest tight. "How do I fix this? How do I mend the threads I've weakened?" "By choosing differently," Jesus said. "By seeking forgiveness, by offering grace, by aligning your heart with love in every moment." The archive of intent began to pulse more brightly, and Michael saw the connections between his choices and those of others. He realized that no decision existed in isolation. Each action he took influenced the actions of others, creating a ripple effect that spread far beyond what he could see. He watched as a single choice, a moment of generosity or a word of encouragement, brightened the threads of people he had never met. Conversely, moments of anger or indifference dimmed the threads, allowing the darkness to creep in. "This is the burden of free will," Jesus said. "It is a gift, but it carries responsibility. Your choices shape not only your own path but the paths of those around you." Michael's gaze fell on a particularly dark section of the archive. The threads there were almost completely severed, and the shadows loomed heavily. He could see the faces of people consumed by greed, hatred, and despair. Their choices had not only harmed themselves but had spread darkness to others. Is there hope for them? Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. There is always hope, Jesus said. No soul is beyond redemption. Even in the darkest places, the light can find a way. But it requires a willingness to turn back, to choose love over fear. Michael nodded, his resolve strengthening. I want to be part of that light, he said. I want to mend the threads I've weakened and strengthen the ones I've neglected. The archive began to shift, the scenes fading into a soft, golden glow. Michael felt a sense of calm wash over him, as though the weight of what he had seen was balanced by the promise of redemption. You have seen the power of choice, Jesus said. You now understand that love is not an abstract concept. It is an action, a commitment, a way of being. It is the thread that binds creation, the light that pushes back the darkness. Michael turned to Jesus, his voice steady. What happens now? There is more to see, Jesus said. More to understand. Your journey is not yet complete, but you are beginning to align your heart with truth. The air shimmered, and the archive of intent dissolved into light. Michael felt a surge of anticipation as the next phase of his journey unfolded. The light around Michael grew brighter, enveloping him in a warmth that felt both comforting and overwhelming. He stood in silence, the weight of everything he had seen pressing heavily on his chest. The golden threads, the dark tendrils, the interconnectedness of every choice. They were not abstract concepts anymore. They were real, tangible, and profoundly important. Jesus stood before him, his presence steady, his gaze filled with compassion. You have seen much, Michael, he said. You now stand at the threshold of understanding. What you choose next will define your journey. Michael nodded, his heart pounding. I've seen how my choices ripple outward, how they strengthen or weaken the connections around me. I want to choose love, to strengthen the light. But I still feel so small. How can one person make a difference in all of this? Jesus extended his hand, and the light around them shimmered. A new scene unfolded, showing a vast ocean stretching to the horizon. At first, it seemed calm, but as Michael watched, he noticed ripples forming across its surface. Each ripple originated from a single point. A stone dropped into the water. Every action, Jesus said, gesturing to the ripples, creates an effect. Love, no matter how small, spreads outward, touching lives you may never see. The scene shifted, and Michael saw a young boy sitting alone on a park bench. A man walked by and stopped, offering the boy a sandwich and a kind word. The boy's thread glowed brightly, the light traveling outward to connect with others. Years later, Michael saw the boy as an adult, now offering kindness to someone else in need, continuing the cycle. Even the smallest act of love can ignite a chain reaction, Jesus said. It is not the size of the act that matters, but the intent behind it. The light shimmered again, and Michael was now standing in a small room. In front of him was a mirror, its surface glowing faintly. He stepped closer, his reflection coming into focus. But it wasn't just him. Within the mirror, he saw the threads of light connected to his heart. Some were strong and vibrant, while others were frayed, barely holding on. This is the state of your soul, Jesus said. The light reflects your choices, your intentions, your alignment with love. Michael's chest tightened as he studied the frayed threads. I've done so much harm, he said, his voice trembling. I've let fear and indifference guide me too often. Jesus placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. The frayed threads can be mended, he said. The light is not lost. Every moment moving forward offers the chance to realign, to choose differently. Michael looked back at the mirror, a flicker of determination igniting within him. How do I start? He asked. By seeing, Jesus said. By choosing to notice those around you, to act with compassion, to love without expectation. The path to mending begins with awareness. The room faded, replaced by a bustling cityscape. Michael was surrounded by people, walking, talking, living their lives. The golden threads were everywhere, weaving between them, but so were the shadows. He saw moments of connection, a man helping a stranger with directions, a woman comforting a crying child, and moments of separation, a couple arguing, a person ignoring a beggar on the street. Michael felt both hope and sorrow. There's so much potential here, he said. But there's so much division too. Humanity is at a crossroads, Jesus said. The threads of connection are fraying in many places, but the light remains. It is up to each person to choose which path they will walk. Michael turned to Jesus, his resolve hardening. What can I do? How can I help? By walking your path with intention, Jesus said. By being a light in the darkness. Your actions may seem small, but they are part of a greater design. The cityscape dissolved, and Michael found himself standing at the base of a great tree. Its branches stretched into the heavens, and its roots sank deep into the earth. The golden threads he had seen before were interwoven with the tree, pulsing with life. This is the tree of truth, Jesus said. It represents the interconnectedness of all things, humanity, creation, and the Creator. Michael placed a hand on the tree's bark, feeling its warmth. A surge of energy coursed through him, filling him with clarity and purpose. He understood now that he was not separate from the world, but deeply connected to it. What happens next? He asked, turning to Jesus. You have a choice, Jesus said. You can remain here, in the light of understanding, or you can return to earth, carrying this truth with you. The decision is yours. Michael hesitated, his mind racing. The idea of staying in this place of peace was tempting, but he thought of his wife, Claire, and his son. He thought of the people he had seen in the visions, the neighbor, the stranger, the child on the swing. They needed light, and he had the power to bring it. I want to go back, Michael said, his voice steady. I want to make things right. I want to be a part of the light. Jesus nodded, his gaze filled with both gravity and warmth. Then go with love, Michael. Walk your path with courage, and remember that every choice matters. The light around Michael began to shift, growing brighter and more intense. He felt himself being pulled gently away from the tree, the threads of connection wrapping around him like a warm embrace. The last thing he saw was Jesus's compassionate gaze, a reminder of the truth he now carried. Michael gasped, his eyes snapping open. He was back in the hospital bed, Claire's hand clutching his. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered his name, her voice thick with emotion. You're back, she said, her words trembling. I thought I'd lost you. Michael smiled weakly, his heart swelling with gratitude. I'm here, he said, his voice soft but filled with certainty. And I have so much to tell you. The golden threads were no longer just a vision, they were a reality. Michael could see them now, connecting him to Claire, to the world, to the Creator. He had been given a second chance, and he was determined to make every moment count. The light within him was stronger than ever, and he knew that no darkness could overcome it. As Michael lay in the hospital bed, his breathing steadying, the weight of his journey began to settle over him. He opened his eyes to see Claire's tear-streaked face leaning over him, her grip on his hand firm, as though anchoring him to the present. You're awake, she whispered, her voice trembling with relief. You came back. Michael smiled weakly, his chest tight with gratitude. I saw him, Claire, he said, his voice hoarse but filled with conviction. I saw Jesus. Claire's eyes widened, her lips parting in astonishment. Jesus? Michael, what happened? Michael took a deep breath, the memories of his near-death experience flooding back. He showed me everything, he said. The threads that connect us all, the choices that strengthen or weaken them. Love and fear, every moment, every decision matters. Claire nodded slowly, her tears flowing freely now. You've been given a second chance, she said, and we'll make it count. In the weeks that followed, Michael's recovery was slow but steady. Each day brought new clarity, new purpose. The vision of the golden threads stayed with him, a constant reminder of his place in the web of creation. He began to see the world differently. Every interaction, every moment, was an opportunity to strengthen the light. He reached out to those he had neglected. He mended the frayed threads of his marriage, apologizing to Claire for the times he had let his pride overshadow their connection. Together, they built new habits of love and understanding, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. Michael also reconnected with his son, spending time not just as a father but as a friend. He listened more, judged less, and let his love guide their conversations. The threads between them, once weak, began to glow with newfound strength. Beyond his family, Michael made a conscious effort to see the people around him. He stopped to help strangers, offered kind words to those in need, and volunteered at a local shelter. Each act, no matter how small, felt like a step toward repairing the tapestry of humanity. Years later, Michael stood in his garden, watching the sun set over the horizon. The golden hues of the sky reminded him of the threads he had seen in his journey, the intricate web of connection that bound all of creation. Claire joined him, slipping her hand into his. Their years together had not been without challenges, but they had faced them with love and faith, strengthening the threads between them. Their son, now grown, had followed Michael's example, living a life of kindness and compassion. He had become a teacher, dedicating himself to guiding and inspiring the next generation. Michael often thought of the vision of Jesus, the tree of truth, and the choices that shaped eternity. He understood now that his life was part of a much greater design, and while he couldn't change the world alone, his actions were part of a ripple that extended far beyond him. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, Michael whispered a prayer of gratitude. "Thank you for the second chance, Lord. Thank you for the light, for the love, and for the connections that make us whole."